Everyone, I'm Dr. Jessica Parker. I'm the owner and founder of Dissertation by Design, where we support graduate students all the way to early career faculty with pretty much all aspects of their research. This is our fourth year partnering with Lumivero to host this Research Writing Institute. So we always really enjoy working with everyone who joins these webinars. Some of you might become our clients, some of you might go to our YouTube channel, which I'll share with you. But we're really passionate about supporting scholars, and Kirstie Eastwood is my CEO and my lead statistician. We've worked together for the past 3 years now. She's a very skilled statistician and mathematician, and I'm excited to introduce her. But before she dives in, I just want to provide a little bit of continuity. If you joined yesterday's session, you met me in a slightly different context, and I've already gotten some messages on LinkedIn, so I want to clarify. I own 2 companies. Yesterday, I was representing Moxie, which is my generative AI ed tech company. And then today I'm representing Dissertation by Design. So this morning we had a session on writing up qualitative findings with Dr. Veronica Richard. And then now we're going to have Kirstie talking about reporting statistical results. I'll be manning the Q&A. I'll be answering questions that I can. If it's stats related, I'll leave it for Kirstie. So please put your questions in the Q&A instead of the chat, as the chat can get a little bit hard to track. But I'll hand it over to Kirstie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica. So Jessica's covered a little bit of who we are as Dissertation by Design, but I'd like to also just start by introducing myself briefly, telling you a little bit about what we're going to talk about, and we take it from there. So the session is about reporting statistical results and some research writing considerations. And every aspect of reporting statistical results, it varies depending on the context within which you're writing. So this is a bit of an overview. A lot of it is applicable across the board, but it may be more specific to dissertation writing versus a report that you might have if you're working in industry and you're writing a report for your boss or for a marketing agency or something along those lines. So a little bit about me over and above what Jessica has introduced, just so that you can have a feel for who I am. So I am a stats consultant. I like to think of myself as an educator first and foremost, and a researcher. I've been doing this for about 10 years, and I was tallying up the number of research projects that I have worked on over and above grant-funded research, but it includes grant-funded research, it includes scholars pursuing, graduate students pursuing their PhDs, their master's theses. It includes faculty conducting their own research, as well as marketing, NGOs, everything in between. And when I did the tally, it was over 700 research projects. So I'm very blessed and excited that I get to work in different spaces all the time. And it's certainly a very fulfilling role to be in. And the other thing that I do is I develop research methodology courses, quantitative, that's my forte. Qualitative, I leave to Dr. Veronica Richard, that is definitely her space. And my favorite quote of all time is, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." And that is by Nelson Mandela. I am born and bred in South Africa, so this is very close to my heart, and it's something that I fully ascribe and believe in as well. So yes, that's a little bit about me. A little bit about Dissertation by Design. We are a full-service academic coaching firm, so it doesn't matter what stage of the process that you're in, whether you're still conceptualizing your research, you're still busy drafting your proposal, or whether you're right at the end of the process and you are busy looking for editing services, you need help with editing or formatting, we can come in at any stage. Anywhere in that process, we are here to support you. We also donate a portion of our revenue to a scholarship fund to support single mothers and children in developing countries. And this ties right in with my ethos of education is the most powerful weapon that you can choose to change the world. When I met with the owner, Jessica, 3 years ago, when we connected, it was very clear that our values were aligned and that we're not just solely business driven, but we really do believe in the power of education. And I think that also comes through in Jessica's her venture in AI and with Moxie, and to leverage technology as it is today to democratize education, bridge the gap, make it accessible for everybody, make research accessible, make everything accessible as far as we can. We have qualitative methodologists, we have statisticians, we have professional editors. We really have a really diverse team, and it doesn't matter what kind of work you're doing, there's probably someone on our team who would love to connect with you. So our statistical consulting, which is my area, that includes anything thesis support, dissertation support, faculty support, businesses, NGOs, workshops, and everything in between. Okay, enough about that. Let's dive into it. So today we're going to talk about transitioning from data analysis to writing. We're going to talk about structuring the results section. What should it look like? Reporting participant demographics and why it matters. How to connect your results to your research questions. That's often a challenge. How do you present your results with charts and tables? And then we'll briefly talk about some challenges and tips that you can use to tie this all together. So one of the biggest things is everyone's antsy. You want to start writing, you want to get going, but there's so much that needs to be done before you can start thinking about drafting your results, drafting your discussion, or connecting all these pieces of the puzzle. So before we even get to the writing, which is what we're focusing on today, you have to first come up by defining your research questions. These need to be clear, they need to be focused, they need to be researchable, and they guide the entire research process. So it's really important that you get them right. Once you've crafted those research questions, which should hopefully be based off of the literature, you need to ask yourself, okay, well, what data do I need to answer these research questions? So think about the data that will provide the most insight and that will be most relevant to your research objectives. I've had many people come to me who have a large data set, and this data set is full of a wealth of things that can be explored and investigated. But the reality is that the data available doesn't link to the research questions, it doesn't answer it. So it's a very thoughtful process. You use those research questions to guide the data that you need to collect. Where can you source this data? Now you know what you need. Where do you get it from? Is it available on existing data sets? Can you find it in a secondary data set? Do you need to collect this data yourself? Do you need to conduct experiments? Is it going to be a survey? Do you need to go out and do field work? And if it already exists, what is the benefit or what is the cost of using secondary data over and above primary data? So it's a trade-off, and all of these, once again, needs to be a thoughtful, considered decision. If you are collecting primary data, you need to think carefully about your data collection. So how are you going to ensure reliability, validity? Are the survey instruments that you're using, are they self-constructed? Did you as a researcher come up with them yourself? And in that case, that reliability and validity is a very important step in the process of making sure that your subsequent results carry value, carry weight, and that they can be interpreted with confidence and that they are reliable. If you're using a secondary data set, where are you sourcing it from? What is the process? Do you need site authorization, even just to be there to collect the data? Do you need to submit a proposal? What are the ethical considerations around that? if you're collecting primary data, so you're sourcing the data yourself, what are the ethical considerations around that? Are you collecting data from a vulnerable population, from children, from disabled persons, from any vulnerable population? And in that case, those ethical considerations are even more paramount. What about anonymity? What about confidentiality? How are you ensuring that? Are you asking sensitive questions? What are you doing to protect your participants in these particular situations? Once you have your data, it's all about data preparation, data cleaning. So you need to be checking your data for errors, for inconsistencies. You need to make sure that you've captured your data correctly. What are you going to do if you have a large amount of missing data? How are you going to handle that? And what is an appropriate way to handle that? And then next, once you have your data, you have it in front of you and you're ready to go, now you need to start thinking about your statistical methods over and above what you proposed to do, either in your proposal, if you're busy with your thesis or your dissertation, or what was in your concept notes, or what was in your grant application. Because sometimes when the data comes in, it's no longer appropriate to use the methods that you had all originally put forward. So do you have continuous data? Do you have categorical data? Do you have a lot of missing data? Does your data satisfy the parametric assumptions, non-parametric assumptions? And from there, you use a flowchart of sorts to decide what's the most appropriate statistical method. Once you've done that, you move on to analyzing your data. That is the most fun part for me. That's where you jump in, you get to wrangle it, you get to see what's coming out front and center, you get to see the story that the data is telling you. And it's that moment when you're uncovering the insights that you were looking for in step one in your research questions. It's giving you the answers. It's telling you whether your hypotheses are supported or not supported. And that in and of itself is an answer. Once you've analyzed your data, then it's time to interpret it. And only then are you ready to start writing. So there's a long chain of events that needs to happen before you can start getting into the nitty-gritty of the writing itself. So how do you transition from data analysis to writing? These are two separate things. You have a spreadsheet full of numbers, or you have a software application full of numbers, and you need to take all of that. You've got this output, that's tables, numbers, nothing makes sense. And you need to translate that into something meaningful and something that's providing value to the reader. This is also one of my favorite quotes. So I have two favorite quotes. So I misspoke earlier. And it's statistics is the language of science. So just like any other language, mastering the language of statistics, it allows you to communicate complex ideas clearly and concisely to an audience that may not be fluent or proficient in statistical language. Once you've mastered that, you're unstoppable. So I like to think of it as learning the language of statistics is somewhat akin to learning a second language. It comes with its own set of rules, grammar, and exceptions. And it has its own vocabulary. It has its own syntax. It has its own semantics. It has its own nuances. But once you get on top of that, once you can fluently speak that language, it allows you to translate and back translate. It allows you to become the interpreter between the numbers on the spreadsheet and the audience who are interested in what your research has to say. So think of yourself as an interpreter. So I'm curious, given what we've just discussed, how would you rate your fluency in the language of statistics? Is it A, I speak statistics fluently. B, I speak conversational statistics, or just enough to get by. I speak broken statistics, maybe 1 or 2 words here and there, or definitely in need of a translator. I'll just give you a moment and I'll watch as the results come in. And we have so far about 11% feel that they speak statistics fluently. I love that. About 40% conversational statistics, enough to get by. 26% I speak broken statistics, and 20% definitely in need of a translator. So broken statistics in need of a translator, they're roughly the same. Majority feel that conversational, enough to get by. What I take from that is when you're reading an article, so maybe you're looking at a journal article, you're busy reading through that, there's enough fluency there to understand to get the gist of the conversation. It makes me think, so I have a second language. It's one of our 11 official languages in South Africa. It's Afrikaans. And I would say in that language, I speak conversationally. I am able to get by. But what I can't do is I can't convey complex ideas. I can't share deep, meaningful insights. I can't really get to the root of what I'm trying to say, the core of what I'm trying to say. And it's that gap that sometimes leaves me feeling like I can't really express myself. I can't really express what I'm trying to say when I'm speaking in my second language. And when it comes to research, having fluency, or at least quantitative research, when it comes to having fluency in statistical language, it opens another avenue, it opens another door for you to be able to really fully express yourself, express your findings. It helps you be that interpreter, be that translator between the data in front of you and what you really have to say. So let's embrace this linguistic adventure of data. And when it comes to statistical language, it's full of symbols and numbers and formulas, and it can be challenging to understand if you don't have that fluency. Analyzing your data involves that translation. And once it's translated, it needs to be back translated so that your intended audience can understand those key pivotal points that you're trying to get across. So what does that look like? You start with your data, you transform that into statistical language. You see all these p-values, these f-statistics, these t-tests, these t-statistics. You see funny symbols, an omega, an alpha, a beta, and that's telling its own story, but it's speaking in a different language. And then you need to interpret it or back translate it, if you want to call it that, to make it field specific. So the role of a researcher is both a translator and an interpreter. So really, what you have is you have a dual role. And mastery will make you feel empowered. Okay, so XLSTAT, this is one of Limavero's tools. It is very helpful when it comes to transitioning your data analysis from data analysis to writing. And the reason for this is it's one of the very few tools I've come across that provides an interpretation with the output. The interpretation is not necessarily full scale, it's not writing up your results for you, but it's taking some of those results, some of those numbers and tables, and it is turning it into plain language for you, at least somewhat plain language. So The results can be exported into Microsoft Word, where you have these sentences, even if it's one or two, that you can pull off of and you can use as your skeleton and work around it and build your narrative around it. And it provides some written interpretation to aid in that translation or in that interpretation, aid in that interpreter role. So I've just provided 2 screenshots there that you can see once you've run your statistical tests using XLSTAT. It actually gives you some written feedback that you can use to help guide your written interpretation. Okay, so what does this translation look like? I gave you that puzzle piece with the arrows, and it started at data. So this is your raw data. And from the raw data, you turned it into statistical language. And this on the right-hand side of the screen here, this is your statistical language. This is your tables, your F values, your P values. And presenting this to an audience who do not speak statistics fluently does not tell a story. So then you need to take that and interpret it for your intended audience. There are some rules associated with the language of statistics. You do have to present your test statistic, your p-values. It has to come through in your results reporting. But then it's also your job to take that and put it into a sentence, a paragraph that turns it from those statistical symbols into plain language. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of an overview, let's talk about structuring the results section. So you need to be planning for your writing early on in the process. You need to be considering your audience. You need to choose an appropriate writing style, create your outline, and if you have a template available to you, use that template. That template may come from your school, it may come from journal guidelines or article guidelines. It could come from many various, from your boss. But if you have a template, use it. Have that outline. Make sure that before you start writing, you have a skeleton of what questions need to be answered, how you're going to answer them. You don't know what the answer is yet. You haven't started your data analysis, but how you want to position yourself to answer them. And have that structure to help guide you. When you're sitting with a data set in front of you that is full and big, sometimes it's thousands of entries, sometimes it's millions of entries, and it can seem very overwhelming. Remember, when you have a data set, there are countless iterations of questions that can be answered using that data set. It is not your job to answer every single question that is possible to answer using that data set. It's your job to answer the questions that you posed. What do you want to know based off of this data set? It's easy to get lost in the data and find this interesting result and this interesting trend, but you have to keep your focus. And with that said, I want to put this forward as something to think about. I'm going to read it slowly, but I'm also going to leave it here for a moment for everyone to test it. So how, though, to order the subheadings? Both empirical and qualitative studies generally produce a far greater body of analyzed data than will appear in the final draft of the results section or subsections. It's difficult, therefore, when initially confronting the data to know where to start. And it's easy to succumb to the temptation of trying to include as much as possible. The consequence of doing so in both qualitative and empirical theses is a loss of direction. This is usually indicated in the latter by a long confused sequence of tables and figures. What is needed, therefore, is sufficient data to provide coherence to the description provided, but not so much as to disturb its clarity, both to achieve this balance and to provide logic to the manner in which the data are ordered. A clear idea of the narrative needs to be presented, should be developed. Only in this way will the examiners know where they are being led. This particular excerpt was aimed at graduates, but it holds true no matter what results you are presenting. If you try to include as much as possible, it will result in loss of direction. Your reader doesn't understand the story that you're trying to tell. You need to provide sufficient information, and I love this line, but not so much as to disturb its clarity. You don't want to be sent down 20 different side paths, which I'm about to do right now. I was talking to somebody the other day who was going in too many different directions when presenting their results. And it made me think of when I visit my grandmother. When I visit my grandmother, we sit down, we have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and she starts telling me about her friend, let's say Cynthia. And my gran will tell me, do you know Cynthia? I must tell you what happened last week, Thursday. But wait, do you remember Cynthia? Cynthia is married to Bob, and Bob's cousin recently had an interesting encounter at the supermarket. And that supermarket's closing down. And oh, yes, my old brother-in-law used to work at that supermarket. And you have no idea where that story was going, because we were trying to hear what Cynthia said last week, Thursday, and now we can't even remember who Cynthia is. You do not want your dissertation or your research to tell a story like my wonderful, loving grandmother does. So keep that in mind next time you are performing your data analysis and you get a little bit sidetracked. Tell a story that follows a structure and takes the reader on a journey with not too many side journeys. So what does it start with? Set the stage, introduction. Who are the characters of the story? Who does your research pertain to? Rising action. Think about a movie. It starts at the beginning, it sets the stage, there's a nice introduction, then it starts introducing characters one by one, and then things start to get a little bit anxious. You're wondering what's going to happen next. And the parallel in your research is that preliminary analysis for the rising action. Once the action has risen enough, you have a climax, that's your results. And then the resolution, that's your conclusion or your discussion chapter. So think about your research as telling a story. What narrative are you trying to tell? These are the components of telling a good story. Set the stage, introduce your characters, give some background, build the scene, allow some of the anticipation to rise, and then present those results. Boom, this is the star of the show, and then bring it all together, tie it all together, have that resolution. So let's talk a little bit more in detail. Once upon a time versus once upon a study. In your typical storytelling fashion, that's setting the stage, it's establishing the context of the story. It's describing the time, the place, the circumstances. It's setting that foundation for the narrative. It immerses the audience in the story's world. It's pulling them in. And it creates very subtly an atmosphere of anticipation, or sense of atmosphere and anticipation. How does that relate to your study? So again, you're providing context. You're presenting the study's purpose. Why are we here? Why am I reading this? What journey am I about to be taken on? Or without knowing the ending. So it's telling you what direction you're going, but it's not telling you where you've arrived at this particular point. It allows your readers to grasp the context of the forthcoming results, because you need to be saying, where's the time? Where's the place? Under what circumstances are these results? Is your study taking place in North Carolina? Is it taking place in the Eastern Cape in South Africa? Is it taking place in London, in the UK? And it's establishing that foundation for understanding the findings, because we all know that geographical location plays a role in how we understand what we found. We know that time plays a role. When we're talking about results from 1920, it's very different to the context then is very different to the context in 2024. Similarly, so the context in 2020 is very different to the context in 2024. And then, of course, just giving that introduction is allowing that small build of anticipation for, okay, what comes next? Now we start introducing characters. Who are the characters of our study? In traditional storytelling. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. You're
Yeah.
breaking up just a little. Can I just suggest maybe go off camera, maybe to help with the bandwidth?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. In your traditional storytelling, you have the characters who are the key drivers of the story. They have different personalities, motivations. You're introducing the conflicts between them. You have your protagonists. You have your antagonists. You have your supporting characters, your main characters, and all of them are fulfilling different specific roles. It's also helping you facilitate an emotional connection to the narrative, because you're coming to learn about their backgrounds, which is akin to the background of your study. What led you to the space where you want to be investigating or exploring the characters of your research? And then the characters, they take it through, they propel the plot through actions, interactions, and all sorts of things in between, just as your study sample will do as well. So in your study, they're the characters of the research. It's describing the population, the sample characteristics, the demographics. It's once again providing context for interpreting the study's findings. It's giving you background into where have these characters been before? Why are we investigating them now? And what do we hope to change, achieve, or know once we have our results? It allows the readers to visualize and understand your participant group, gives you that connection, that context. Again, it defines to whom the study findings apply, keeps it that specificity, and it provides clarity on the generalizability of the findings. So again, is it contained to a particular geographic region? Is it contained to a particular demographic? It helps with the context. Now that we've set the stage, we've introduced the characters, we start with our rising action of our study. In our traditional storytelling, it's that build up to the climax. It's introducing the choices made by the main characters. It's talking about the events that challenge their goals. It's typically the longest part of the story. It's that, it's that 30, 40, 50 minutes of your movie. It's creating that anticipation. And there's a lot of significant events and developments that happen during this phase. This is very similar to quantitative research. You're describing your study variables. You're assessing reliability and assumption testing. And in your assumption testing, in that space is where you are making choices. And perhaps you had proposed a particular statistical technique, and now the data is telling a different story. The data is making a choice for you, and you have to adjust your path, and you need to tell the reader how the narrative is changing. We were going to do this. However, the data presented to us told us a slightly different story. These characters are telling us a slightly different story. The data is very skewed in this way, or skewed in that way, or this particular sample group does not want to disclose this particular kind of information, which has left us with a lot of missing data. And now we need to readjust. We need to course correct. And this is often the longest part of the report, particularly if this is graduate research. You need to make sure that you are laying all the foundation for that climax. And show the climax. This is your pivotal moment in your traditional storytelling. It's the peak of the tension. It's the most intense, suspenseful, or dramatic point in the narrative. It involves a decisive action, a revelation, or a turning point. And within your study, this is, you've climbed the mountain. You've been traversing this mountain from the beginning, sifting through, you've been trudging, hiking through all the literature. You arrived at a rest point where you could craft your research questions. And then you hiked through all the different data sets, all the different types of data, and you arrived at a point, okay, this is the kind of data that will be best to answer your research questions. And it's the slow hike up the mountain, and now you finally arrived at the peak. You're fulfilling your study's objectives, you're answering your research questions, you've tested your hypotheses. It's the big reveal. You're presenting those key findings that directly address your research questions and your hypotheses. It's this moment of revelation and significance where the outcomes of the study are now discovered by the reader, or when you're doing it, discovered by the researcher. And now we move into your role as the interpreter. So you take that results section and you interpret it for your broader audience. In your traditional storytelling, this resolution is when the loose ends are tied up and your conflicts are resolved, happily ever after. It's bringing closure, and it offers the outcome or final state of the characters. The audience now has a moment, they reflect on the events of the story, the messages of the story, they reflect on this final piece of the puzzle. In your research, this is where you are tying it all together. You're doing that reflection and you're doing that synthesis. So you're summarizing the essential data, the analysis, you're tying it back to the relevance of the study. You're saying, what does this mean? So what? What does this mean? And you're highlighting the key points. You're tying it back to the existing literature, and you're offering the reader some food for thought that then allows them to go and reflect on the events and messages of your research. So just as an example, we're not going to read through all of this, but I've broken the study down into a few of these traditional storytelling components that I'd like to just briefly look over. So you start with setting the stage. And we have here that focuses on examining the relationship between workplace stress and mental health outcomes among employees in the hospitality industry during the reopening of COVID-19 lockdowns. So we know that this is just after the pandemic. We know what we're looking at. We know that we're in the hospitality industry, and it's just providing a little bit of the background information for us. We then introduce the characters. So we had 252 individuals. They were employees in the hospitality industry. We start to talk about their demographic makeup. Are they older? Are they younger? Where are they located? What role were they playing within the hospitality industry? What is their backstory? We then move on to the rising action. This is now, or consider this as now you've already completed your data analysis. So our rising action, we know the reliability of the study measures all exceeded the recommended threshold. And that's telling us that we can have a certain level of confidence in our results. It's been shown to be reliable. We get an idea of the distribution of our scales, of our data, of our measurements. Then we say, to identify potential covariates, what did we do? And now we know that when it came to gender, that did significantly influence occupational well-being. So we need to hold this in our mind, and we let the reader know what we did subsequently. And now everyone's sitting on the edge of their seat and they want to know, okay, well, what are the results? What happened? So the results of the study revealed that workplace stress significantly contributed to the models predicting anxiety and depression among hospitality employees. For anxiety, the inclusion of workplace stress increased the variance explained by 38.5%. That's quite a big change. So now we know that workplace stress accounts for a large portion of anxiety within employees in the hospitality industry. Okay, so 38.5% of anxiety amongst hospitality employees is accounted for by workplace stress. So where do we go and deliver an intervention? What are the practical implications of this? Okay, we need to focus on workplace stress. We need to reduce workplace stress. Similarly, workplace stress made a significant contribution to the model predicting depression. And workplace stress accounted for 34.5% of the variation that we see in depression of hospitality employees. Okay, well, wow, workplace stress really is a strong, significant predictor of depression and anxiety within this particular sample. Okay, what can we do? What can we do to mitigate this? So our resolution. In summary, the study findings indicate that workplace stress plays a significant role in the mental well-being of hospitality workers during the reopening phase after COVID-19 lockdowns. The last sentence there, by understanding the impact of workplace stress on mental health, organizations can develop targeted interventions and support systems to create a healthier and more supportive work environment for their employees. I realize that this example is quite generic, but it follows the same recipe as that a more specific example should as well, or more specific targeted research should as well. And you always want to leave in your resolution space for reflection for the reader, and space for the reader to say, okay, well, I can take on this and I can build on it. So the reader in this case might take this and say, okay, well, organizations can develop targeted interventions. Okay, I'm going to build on this and work on a targeted intervention based off of the results from this particular study. Okay, let's break it down a little bit more specific. So reporting participant demographics, introducing the characters. I know this is somewhat repetitive, but it's very important. So it provides context for the study findings. It allows for comparisons between different groups of participants. This may not be explicitly stated within your research questions, but once you are deep in the data dive, you may see some trends, some patterns emerging, and you may want to further explore that. Not at the expense of loss of clarity. It may be for a subsequent study, but it's giving you that overarching view, it's giving you that bird's eye view to be able to do it at a subsequent time. Or if it is not at the expense of loss of clarity, you can do it within your research scope, if it's appropriate. It helps you identify potential biases in the study sample. Think about a study that is exploring food spending habits. And you want to know, what does the majority of North Carolina spend their grocery budget on? Is it takeout? Is it eating in? Is it alcohol? Is it pop or fizzy drinks? Is it candy? What are their food spending habits? And maybe how does that relate to activity levels? How does that relate to dietary intake? How does that relate to subsequent health outcomes? Okay, so you send out a survey. One of the questions in the survey is about income. And when you get those results back, you see, okay, well, 90% of my sample was making above the 90th percentile of the state general income. Okay, well, now you have context. We've identified a potential bias in the study. We know that this is relating specifically only to high earners, and this is not representative of the eating habits or the food grocery spending habits of North Carolina as a whole. You might find that the people who answered the survey, it was on pensioners discount day at the supermarket, and they answered the survey, and your entire study sample is 70 plus years old. Okay, well, that's giving you some insight too. So it's helping you ensure that the study findings are generalizable to the wider population, and this has to come through in your writing. Depending on your study, different demographic variables carry and have different relevance. Some demographic variables are more relevant for certain types of studies than others. Depending on your research question, this will also determine what kind of demographic variables are relevant. and your reporting guidelines. Are you writing for a journal? Are you writing for a dissertation? Are you writing for your boss? And how does that influence what demographics should be reported? Once again, loss of clarity. You should not report everything. We don't want to know everybody's marital status, their income, their gender, their sex, their hair color, their eye color, their weight, their education, where they live. It needs to be a thoughtful decision. Okay, so let's look at an example. Let's take an example of a study, and this study consisted of 377 participants who were full-time teachers in USA schools, and examined whether teachers' teaching efficacy and self-esteem relate to their job satisfaction. And the following research questions were put forward based on this purpose. Is there a correlation between teachers' efficacy and their job satisfaction among full-time teachers? Is there a correlation between teachers' self-esteem and their job satisfaction? And then are there differences in teachers' efficacy, self-esteem, and job satisfaction between primary and secondary school teachers in USA schools? So how do we report these participant demographics using XLSTAT data reports? Well, we'll have our data set and we'll run what we need to run, which I might show you in a short while. And we take that, and here we go as our interpreter. We take it and we transform it into something that the reader can easily digest. So here you can see that table on the right-hand side is probably something that you're very familiar with. That's a table reported in your APA format. And you can see, okay, well, there were 135 primary school teachers, 242 secondary school teachers. How does that relate as a percentage, or how does that break down as a percentage? And you're able to take all of these numbers, sorry, I've just gone back a slide, all of these numbers and all of this output, and package it into a digestible table, which then translates once again into a digestible paragraph, or 2 paragraphs, or whatever is necessary. Once you've got your demographics nailed down and you've done your preliminary analysis and presented that, there's not enough time in the session to go through every tiny thing. So let's talk about connecting your results to the research questions. This is something that is often missed time and time again. People will get their results and then they will struggle, or they will perform their data analysis and they will struggle to make that link back to their research questions. That can be a function of loss of clarity in the data analysis process. When you've performed too many statistical tests, you're reporting on too many participant demographics, you've collected too much data, and now it's overwhelming to look at this data analysis output because you don't know what goes where and how to link it back to your 3 clear, concise, specific research questions. So let's talk about how do you take your results and make sure that your research questions are addressed, or your study questions or your study objectives. So there are 5 essential components to this. You need to restate your research question, not necessarily verbatim, but you need to reorient the reader to what were you trying to answer when you collected this data? So reorient the reader, bring them back into the picture. Then you have to report your statistical test. So you've got your result, but how did you arrive there? What did you do to get this result? And then your results in plain language. So what was the result? Was there a significant correlation between teacher efficacy and job satisfaction? Yes or no? Yes, there is a significant positive relationship between X and Y. Then you have to generally report your results in statistics or numbers. Those are all your test statistics and your p-values and your degrees of freedom and all those things that no one wants to look at, those symbols. But that's your evidence. That's your empirical evidence. It's not enough to say, I performed a t-test and there was a significant difference. Show me the evidence. That is the evidence. And then your meaning. What's the implication of this? So what? What does this mean? What are the implications? If you're doing graduate research, you're probably presenting the meaning in a subsequent chapter. You probably have your results chapter where it's very cut and dry. And then you are providing the meaning in your discussion chapter. If you're writing for a journal article, a manuscript, or for your boss, for your work, these will probably all be together. So it is context specific, but these 5 components need to be presented even if they're not presented all together. Okay, so back to our example. Let's see, how can we write up these 5? How can we use these 5 components to show how we answer these research questions? Okay, so research question number 1. Is there a correlation between teachers' efficacy and their job satisfaction among full-time teachers? And let's get the evidence. All right, so we did a correlation analysis and we've used our software program, whatever it might be, in this case, XLSTAT. And we've performed our correlation analysis and we've taken our data, we've turned it into our statistical language. Now we need to turn it into something that's appropriate for our intended audience and for our reader. So I'm going to first show you the results. How do you write it up? This looks like a lot. So let's break it down. I'm going to remind you quickly, what are those 5 components? So we need, let's go back once again, our research question, our statistical test, our results in plain language, our results in statistics or numbers, and the implication, the meaning. What is this telling us? Okay, so let's break it down. Our statistical test. Okay, how did we arrive at this result? Well, we performed an independent samples t-test. Okay, component, one of the components, tick. Okay, reorient the reader. Well, why did we perform that statistical test? Well, we did it to investigate whether there are differences in self-esteem between primary and secondary school teachers in USA schools. Okay, so this wasn't the correlation analysis, by the way. This is the t-test for research question number 3, I just realized. But we reorient the reader. We want to know, are there significant differences in self-esteem between primary and secondary school teachers? So what did we do? We performed an independent samples t-test to investigate whether there are differences. So we have 2 of the 5 components. Okay, results in English or in plain language. This should say in plain language. Well, what were the results? Well, the results reveal a significant difference in self-esteem levels, indicating that primary school teachers reported significantly lower self-esteem compared to secondary school teachers. Forget those numbers in between. These are our results in plain English. But now, what are those results in statistics or numbers? What's the evidence? What's the empirical support? And here is where we have our symbols, our means, our standard deviations, our test statistics, our degrees of freedom, our p-values, sometimes our effect sizes. But you should be able to read whatever sentence you've provided. So I'm going to go back once more. You should be able to take out all these numbers and all these symbols and understand what the results are without looking at them, without looking at those symbols and numbers. But as a requirement of scientific writing and statistical writing, we do need that empirical support. So what was the average self-esteem level for primary school teachers? Okay, it was 1.55. In your preliminary analysis, and your write-up there, you would have provided context of what's the lowest self-esteem level, what's the highest. That gives you the background to be able to interpret what is 1.55 when it comes to self-esteem. Is that low? Is it high? Well, if the scale only goes from 1 to 5, then it's pretty low. Whereas for secondary school teachers, it's 4.51. That's close on the higher end. Okay, that's pretty high. And then on top of that, we have the statistical significance, that empirical support that says the difference between these two, yep, it's big, it's large enough for us to say it's statistically significant. There's something going on here. Okay, so what? What does it mean? Well, these findings offer important implications for understanding the psychological well-being of teachers within the United States education system. The significantly lower self-esteem reported by primary school teachers suggests a need for targeted support. Okay, well, what are the factors contributing to lower self-esteem of primary versus secondary school teachers? And again, you're bringing back right now the characters. Were the teachers, were they all student teachers? Was the years of teaching experience, did it range? Was it predominantly male teachers? Was it teachers in a particular area? At what schools were these teachers in? Were they all from the same school? Were they from different schools? Was it within a particular state? Was it across the whole United States? What subject were these teachers teaching? And that's helping you when it comes to targeted support and interventions as well. Okay. I'm going to quickly run through just how you can present some results with charts and tables. And then I think we'll either go into a brief XLSTAT demo before the larger XLSTAT demo, or we'll open it up for Q&As. So why present charts and tables? Well, it's helping you summarize and organize large amounts of data. It's certainly helpful in providing visual demonstrations of trends and patterns in the data that are otherwise difficult to see if you're looking at a spreadsheet full of data. I want to use the word, I don't know if this is appropriate, but languageless. So it's a visual representation. It is, you do not need, how does that saying go? So now I'm jumping all over the place. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And that's what charts can do in your research. One good chart can tell a story that 2 pages of writing will struggle to tell. So use your charts wisely and thoughtfully, and you might tell a stronger story than what you would do if it was telling the story in a written narrative. It helps to communicate your research findings in a clear, concise, and visual way. And it makes those findings more accessible to a wider audience just by virtue of, if that picture is telling a story of 1,000 words, someone can look at it, glance at it, and get an overview of what you're trying to say. When you're writing, you always need to introduce and refer to the chart or table. You cannot present a chart or table with no reference being made to it. You have to introduce it either before or after the text, depending on your guidelines. If you have any symbols or abbreviations, you need a legend. Do not assume that the reader knows what SEM stands for, or that they know what the asterisk that you've put in stands for, or some other symbol, or that they know what SE stands for. Okay, well, in this previous example, self-esteem. I've been working on this for 6 months, and so it's obvious, it's self-esteem. No, it's not obvious to everyone. Provide a legend. Interpret the chart or table in the text. So you pull out, highlight the important information. You do not want to be redundant in your writing by having a table that has all the means or the frequencies and percentages, and then you just regurgitating that in a paragraph subsequent to the table. It's an interpretation, it's not a regurgitation. And then use that chart or table to support your claims. If you see a visual trend, talk about it. Talk about it. And the chart or table should not be the main focus of your writing. You're using it to supplement your narrative and your story. So you do not want the paper that's just full of charts and tables, but you do want to draw the reader's attention to that chart or table so that they get this holistic overview, and then you break it down into bite-sized chunks. Should you use a chart or should you use a table? Well, consider the specific needs of your audience and the type of data you're trying to present. A chart is visually appealing. It can visually demonstrate trends and patterns. It can display changes over time. It can visually demonstrate differences across data sets. Whereas a table is a nice, easy way to take a spreadsheet with millions of data entries and present that in a concise way. And it's certainly a better choice when you need to be very, very specific and show the exact values rather than general trends. So it's very field specific. And once again, you need to just be considering your audience, your field, and what the purpose is. What are you trying, what message are you trying to get across? Know what charts to use. Well, do you have categorical data, ordinal data, interval data, ratio data? What's the purpose of your chart or table? Are you trying to summarize, compare, show relationships? So if you have categorical data, bar charts, pie charts, stack bar charts, there's many options. I just gave a few examples. If it's continuous data, histograms, line graphs, box plots, scatter plots. And there's new and exciting ways to visually display your data coming out all the time. So to wrap up somewhat, what are some challenges and tips? Well, what are the common challenges and pitfalls in reporting your statistical results? Of course, misinterpretation. Make sure you know what does your p-value have to be for it to be considered statistically significant? So Don't say something is statistically significant when it's not. Failure to report effect sizes. This is also field specific, but the general consensus in the scientific community is report statistical significance plus effect sizes. Failure to consider confounding variables. So what it essentially, and this is just the limitations of your study. Have you adequately considered limitations or things that you haven't accounted for, and you need to demonstrate that you've considered them? You may not be able to include them, but that you're aware of it and you're aware of this limitation. And lastly, tying back to something that Jessica may have spoken about yesterday, if you were in one of her sessions, just be cautious when you're using AI. If you are using AI to help you with your data analysis or writing up your results, you need to be able to evaluate that output. If you're not able to evaluate that output, you can't be sure that it's doing it correctly. AI is wonderful and an absolute fantastic step forward with technology, but it's also dangerous. It doesn't always get things right. I know, I've tried, I've tested. I've performed data analysis using AI before and done it by hand on the side and double checked for accuracy. I've performed it using AI and then in software programs and double checked it for accuracy. Sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it doesn't. I've asked it to write up results for me before. Sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it doesn't. So unless you're able to check it, to understand what you're looking for, to evaluate that output, remember, it gives you something that's very well written. It's very convincing. Just use with caution, not saying don't use it, but use with caution and use under supervision if you are not fluent in statistics, which only 10% of you were when we took that poll. So all the rest of you who were conversational or desperately in need of a translator, play around, definitely play around, but do not rely on it. It's not always reliable. It has implicit bias, and you just need to be thoughtful, be considered. Your tips and your best practices, conveying your findings clearly, use plain language, be specific, be transparent. Do not report only the things that are the stars of the show. Report, if you posed a research question, answer it, even if it's not the answer that you wanted. Be cautious and avoid statistically ambiguous words. For example, do not use the word significant in a quantitative report unless you are referring to statistically significant. It can confuse the reader. And I think I'm going to wrap up there. So, yeah, thank you. Any questions? I'm going to turn my video back on. I hope the connection is good enough.
Kirstie, I'll just say this is our 4th session. There's no questions in the Q&A. You got a lot of incredible support in the comments saying how clear and compelling this presentation is. But for those of you who do want to enter your questions into the chat, please do that. I think we're about to go through a XLSTAT, but if you have questions, go ahead and enter them into the Q&A.
And all the participants didn't even get to see me, talking with my hands out and telling my story like this. So only got half of it. Let's see, there's a Q&A here. Let me grab it. Okay, so I'm going to read the question out loud for everybody. So what AI tools can help in writing the report of a quant study? I did a multivariate analysis before, and thanks to large statistics website, which is, for those who don't know, that's another statistical application, I could understand and report very complex results, but I can't use it now as they do not provide materials for the advanced analysis SEM I am making now. Can you suggest any good resources to help? I think this links back to what I was saying, just as I was ending the presentation there. The reason I didn't introduce or put AI into this presentation is because I am hesitant to put it forward as a reliable tool to help you write up or interpret your statistical results. That's not to say it won't become that at a later stage, but as it stands right now, it's not. And when you are doing something advanced like SEM, structural equation modeling, you as the researcher need to have first principle understandings or a solid foundational understanding of the math behind it, and how it works. That kind of advanced statistical modeling, you are going to be interpreting the output from AI, sorry, not output. If you have the output, you feed it to AI, and it's interpreting the results for you. In order for you to adequately evaluate those results, you have to have a very, very, very strong foundation of the statistical underpinnings, the mathematical underpinnings of structural equation modeling. So in terms of good resources to suggest, I have some good textbooks that I could refer you to. I know that's boring. It's not AI, it's not ChatGPT, it's not something fun and exciting. And some really good, reputable YouTubers that break down these complex concepts very well and help you structure the interpretation of something like reporting the results of structural equation modeling, as well as the actual process of structural equation modeling. So yeah, pop me an email, and I'll be happy to share those resources with you. So maybe Jessica, can you just pop my email in the chat there? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to just add to that and just heed a warning in terms of the claims that we're seeing. So for example, I'll call out Gemini Pro 1.5. When they released their initial demo, they claimed like 99.9% accuracy at really complex data analytics. But when you dive into the actual documentation to achieve that level of accuracy with Gemini Pro 1.5, you would need to give it at least 5 correct examples, which is called few-shot prompting, to reach that level of accuracy. So unless you're prepared to do that and give it those examples, it's not going to perform at that level. So please just be cautious of the claims being made by these generative AI companies. There's definitely a bit of an AI war. They're all fighting to have their share of the market. And so there's a lot of claims being made that you really need to dig into before you just take them at face value. And when it's high stakes, such as analyzing data or research, and you're not an expert, I just caution you in relying on any form of AI or any tool that does all of it for you.
Thank you very much. I will share some slides while we wait and see if we get any more questions, if you don't mind. I just want to share some resources. I know there have been some questions about XLSTAT, so I want to show that this slide is part of the I started from the wrong slide. Just one moment. But I'll be pulling up a slide with a link to learn more about XLSTAT. Oops. And then you can click on that link to request a demo or receive more information. There we go. That's the right one. And we'll also be having a demo in just under 10 minutes, about 8 minutes from now, where you will also be able to see XLSTAT in action and ask more detailed questions. It's a very familiar interface. It's an Excel add-on, which I think is one of the big benefits of using this tool for statistical analysis. And then I want to share, we have a research grant that we are going to be awarding to an early career researcher. Applications are due July 31st, and we are looking for someone who has received their doctorate between 2016 and 2023 and has an idea for a research project that will use in vivo Citavi or XLSTAT. So, and my colleague just shared information in the chat about that. And we are also accepting proposals for our Lumivero virtual conference. If you want to show how you've been using a Lumivero software tool in your work, or just simply share what you've been doing in your work and how you've been making an impact in your field or in your organization with your data analysis or research. So it does not need to be specific to a Lumivero product. And so we encourage any of you to apply, and the deadline for that is July 12th. And we also have a link in the chat about that process. And we have a link in the chat too about our raffle. So if you scan the QR code on the screen right now, or you can just click the link in the chat, you can fill out the form to enter in a raffle for Vivo Citavi or XLSTAT. And we have a survey too to learn about how this to learn your feedback on this event and to always improve for future events. So we encourage you to participate. The link is in the chat as well. And we also have a link to learn more about Lumivero solutions. So again, all these links in the PDF should work when you open up the PDF. And I will stop my screen share now. And thank you again, Stacy, for sharing those links in the chat. Yes, we do have one more session. It is starting in 6 minutes, and it will show XLSTAT in detail. So for those of you who do have questions about XLSTAT, please do join us at that session. Okay, so I think that
I can just interject for 1 second, sorry. Apologies. I do see there's just one more question here that says, does XLSTAT work on Mac the same as PC? And yes, it does. It is available for both. And in my closing statement, just, yeah, thanks for joining, everybody, and reach out if you would like more resources, if you'd like anything, if you want to learn more about dissertation by design, or if you just want to chat or anything, I'm always around. So yeah, thank you for coming, and I enjoyed it.
Yes, this is a bittersweet session. This is the end of our last session with dissertation by design. It's been great collaborating with you all at Dissertation by Design and Moxie. Feedback has just been fantastic, and it's continuing now in the chat. So yes, we can't thank you enough, and we hope a lot of you will stay also for the session coming up. And yes, if there's anything else you'd like to add, Jessica or Kirstie, feel free.
Thank you for the support. We always, like I said, this is our 4th year partnering with Lumivero for this Research Writing Institute. We always enjoy it. So yeah, just thank you for attending. We're here for all of you. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the XLSTAT demo.
Great. Thank you so much. And in this brief break, feel free to also check out our exhibit hall if you go into the portal where you first entered the event, and the portal where you joined all of these sessions from. There is a link in the menu to the exhibit hall if you would like something to do for the next few minutes before we start the next session. Thank you.
Good.
Bye, everyone.